In the basement of an old photography studio in Salem, Oregon, there sits a wedding photograph from 1899 that has puzzled experts for over a century. At first glance, it appears to be a typical Victorian wedding portrait, a young couple standing before an ornate mirror, surrounded by their wedding party. But look closer at the reflection in that mirror, and you'll see something that shouldn't be there, a face that belongs to no one in the photograph. A face that no living person has ever been able to identify. This is the story of the Whitmore wedding photograph and the dark mystery that has followed it through 5 generations of a family that wished they had never posed for that picture. Because sometimes when we capture a moment in time, we capture more than we bargained for. Sometimes we invite something into our world that was never meant to be there. Our story begins in the autumn of 2023, when digital archivist Emma Caldwell was hired to digitize the contents of the old Hartley photography studio in Salem. The studio had been closed since 1987, when the last member of the Hartley family had died, leaving behind decades of photographic equipment and thousands of glass plate negatives dating back to the 1890s. Emma was a specialist in historical photography preservation, with a master's degree in archival science from the University of Washington and a particular expertise in Victorian-era photographic techniques. She had worked with museums and historical societies across the Pacific Northwest, helping to preserve and catalogue photographic collections that might otherwise be lost to time. Her reputation in the field had been built on meticulous attention to detail and an almost supernatural ability to coax information from damaged or deteriorated photographs. Emma had developed innovative digital restoration techniques that could reveal details in old photographs that had been invisible for decades. The techniques she had pioneered involved using multiple scanning methods and advanced computer algorithms to enhance and clarify historical images. Her work had helped solve several historical mysteries and had contributed to important genealogical research for families across the region. The Hartley Studio had been one of Salem's most prestigious photography establishments during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Founded by Marcus Hartley in 1887, the studio had captured the weddings, portraits, and family gatherings of Salem's most prominent families for nearly a century. Marcus Hartley had been a pioneer in photographic techniques, experimenting with new methods and equipment that allowed him to create images of exceptional quality and artistic merit. His studio had been equipped with the finest cameras and lighting equipment available, and he had employed several assistants who were skilled in the complex processes of developing and printing photographs. The studio had also been known for its innovative use of props and backdrops, creating elaborate settings that transported subjects to exotic locations or historical periods. Marcus Hartley had been particularly skilled at creating romantic and dramatic atmospheres that captured the Victorian era's fascination with sentiment and emotion. Emma had been hired by the Salem Historical Society, which had acquired the studio's contents after the building was sold to developers. The society wanted to preserve the historical photographs before the building was demolished to make way for a modern office complex. The project was expected to take several months, as the collection included not only thousands of glass plate negatives, but also extensive business records, correspondence, and technical documentation that provided insight into the operation of a Victorian-era photography studio. The business records alone represented a treasure trove of information about Salem's social history, documenting the relationships between families, the evolution of fashion and customs, and the economic development of the region during a crucial period of growth. The studio occupied the second floor of a brick building on State Street, with large north-facing windows that had once provided the perfect natural light for portrait photography. The main studio space was filled with antique cameras, developing equipment and props that had been used to create the formal portraits that were popular during the Victorian era. The equipment included several large-format cameras mounted on wooden tripods, each capable of producing the large glass plate negatives that were the standard for professional photography in the 1890s. There were also numerous backdrops, painted scenes that could be positioned behind subjects to create the illusion of elaborate settings. The props collection was extensive, including furniture, decorative objects, and clothing that could be used to enhance the visual appeal of portraits. Marcus Hartley had understood that photography was as much about creating an atmosphere as it was about capturing a likeness. But it was in the basement storage room that Emma made her most intriguing discovery. Hundreds of glass plate negatives were stored in wooden cabinets, each carefully labeled with dates and client names. The negatives represented a comprehensive visual record of Salem's social history from the 1890s through the 1950s. The storage system was remarkably well organized, with negatives arranged chronologically and cross-referenced by subject matter and client name. Marcus Hartley had been meticulous in his record-keeping, maintaining detailed logs of every photograph taken in his studio. Each negative was stored in a protective sleeve with detailed notes about the exposure settings, lighting conditions, and any special techniques that had been used. This documentation provided valuable insight into the technical aspects of Victorian-era photography. Emma had been working through the collection systematically, scanning each negative and creating digital archives organized by date and subject matter. Most of the photographs were typical of their era: formal family portraits, wedding pictures, and commemorative photographs marking important life events. The scanning process was time-consuming and required careful handling of the fragile glass plates. Emma used specialized equipment that could capture high-resolution digital images without damaging the original negatives. Each scan was carefully catalogued and cross-referenced with the studio's business records. The work required extreme patience and attention to detail, as many of the glass plates showed signs of age and deterioration. Emma had to use various restoration techniques to bring out details that had been obscured by time and environmental damage. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October that Emma first encountered the Whitmore wedding photograph. The glass plate negative was stored in a cabinet marked 1899 Weddings, and the label read Whitmore Blackwood Wedding, October 31st, 1899. The choice of Halloween as a wedding date struck Emma as unusual, even for the Victorian era when superstitions and folklore played a significant role in daily life. Most couples would have avoided such an ominous date for their wedding, preferring more traditional times of year associated with good fortune and prosperity. The Victorian era was filled with superstitions about wedding dates, with many couples consulting almanacs and folk wisdom to choose the most auspicious times for their ceremonies. Halloween, with its associations with death and the supernatural, would have been considered highly inappropriate for such a joyous occasion. Emma carefully removed the glass plate from its protective sleeve and placed it on the light table for examination. The negative showed a formal wedding portrait taken in what appeared to be the main studio space upstairs. A young couple stood in the center of the frame, surrounded by their wedding party, with an ornate Victorian mirror positioned behind them. The composition was typical of Marcus Hartley's work, showing his skill at arranging large groups of people in aesthetically pleasing formations. The lighting was expertly managed, creating depth and dimension that brought the subjects to life. The technical quality of the photograph was exceptional, demonstrating Marcus Hartley's mastery of the complex photographic processes of the era. The exposure was perfectly balanced, and the focus was sharp throughout the entire frame. The bride, according to the studio records, was Miss Catherine Whitmore, daughter of Judge Harrison Whitmore, one of Salem's most prominent citizens. The groom was Mr. Jonathan Blackwood, a successful merchant who had recently moved to Salem from Boston. The wedding had taken place on Halloween of 1899, which was considered an unusual but not unheard of choice for a wedding date during that era. Emma began the scanning process, adjusting the digital camera settings to capture the maximum detail from the glass plate negative. As the high-resolution image appeared on her computer screen, she noticed something that made her pause. In the reflection of the ornate mirror behind the wedding party, there was a face that didn't belong to anyone in the photograph. Emma zoomed in on the mirror's reflection, studying the image carefully. The wedding party consisted of 12 people: the bride and groom, 4 bridesmaids, 4 groomsmen, and the bride's parents. But in the mirror's reflection, she could clearly see 13 faces. The extra face belonged to a woman who appeared to be in her 30s, with dark hair and pale skin. She was positioned slightly behind and to the left of the bride, but when Emma looked at the main portion of the photograph, there was no one standing in that location. Emma's first thought was that there might be a flaw in the glass plate negative, or perhaps some kind of double exposure that had occurred during the original photography session. But as she examined the image more closely, she realized that the mysterious face was too clear and detailed to be the result of a photographic error. The woman in the mirror had distinct facial features, high cheekbones, deep-set eyes, and a solemn expression that contrasted with the joyful faces of the wedding party. She appeared to be wearing dark clothing, possibly a dress or coat that was typical of the 1890s fashion. What was most unsettling about the image was the woman's expression. While everyone else in the photograph was smiling or at least looking pleasant, the mysterious woman appeared to be staring directly at the camera with an expression of intense sadness or anger. The woman's eyes seemed to follow Emma as she moved around the computer screen, creating an eerie sense that she was being watched by someone who had been dead for more than a century. Emma made several high-resolution scans of the photograph, adjusting the contrast and brightness to bring out as much detail as possible. No matter how she enhanced the image, the mysterious face remained clearly visible in the mirror's reflection. She also examined the glass plate negative under magnification, looking for any signs of tampering or manipulation. The negative appeared to be genuine and unaltered, with no evidence of double exposure or other photographic tricks. The glass plate showed the natural aging patterns that would be expected from a photograph taken in 1899, including slight discoloration and the development of hairline cracks that were typical of glass negatives from that era. Intrigued by the anomaly, Emma decided to research the Whitmore family and their 1899 wedding. The Salem Historical Society had extensive records of the city's prominent families, and the Whitmores had been among Salem's most influential residents during the late 1800s. Judge Harrison Whitmore had served on the Oregon Supreme Court and had been instrumental in establishing several of Salem's civic institutions. His family had been among the founding members of Salem's First Presbyterian Church, and they had donated land for the construction of the city's first public library. The Whitmore family had also been involved in the development of Salem's early business district, owning several commercial properties and investing in the railroad that connected Salem to Portland and other major cities in the region. His daughter, Catherine, had been considered one of the city's most eligible young women, and her wedding to Jonathan Blackwood had been one of the social events of the year. The couple had met when Jonathan arrived in Salem to establish his import business, and their courtship had been closely followed by the local society pages. Catherine had been known for her beauty and intelligence, and she had received an excellent education for a woman of her era. She spoke French and German fluently and was accomplished in music and literature. Emma found newspaper accounts of the wedding in the Salem Daily Journal, which described it as a magnificent celebration attended by the finest families of our fair city. The article included a detailed description of the bride's dress, which had been made of ivory silk with intricate beadwork and lace trim imported from France. The wedding ceremony had taken place at the First Presbyterian Church, followed by a reception at the Whitmore family mansion. The reception had featured an elaborate dinner with multiple courses, dancing and entertainment, provided by a string quartet from Portland. The newspaper account also mentioned that the wedding had been photographed by Marcus Hartley, Salem's premier photographer, and that the portraits would serve as a lasting memento of the joyous occasion. But there was no mention of any unusual occurrences during the wedding, and no reference to anyone who might correspond to the mysterious face in the mirror. The newspaper account portrayed the event as a perfect celebration of the union between two prominent families. Emma decided to examine other photographs from the Hartley Studio collection to see if the same face appeared in any other images. She spent the next several days scanning through hundreds of photographs from the 1890s and early 1900s, looking for any sign of the mysterious woman. She found several other photographs that included mirrors or reflective surfaces, but none showed the same unexplained face. The phenomenon seemed to be unique to the Whitmore wedding photograph. However, Emma did notice some other unusual aspects of the Whitmore wedding photograph that she hadn't initially observed. The lighting in the mirror's reflection didn't quite match the lighting in the main portion of the photograph, suggesting that the reflection might have been captured at a slightly different time or under different conditions. There was also something strange about the positioning of the wedding party members in the reflection. While most of them appeared in the expected positions, a few seemed to be standing in slightly different locations than they were in the main photograph. The discrepancies were subtle but noticeable to someone with Emma's trained eye for photographic analysis. They suggested that something unusual had occurred during the photography session, though she couldn't determine what that might have been. Emma's research led her to the Salem Public Library, where she hoped to find more information about the Whitmore and Blackwood families. The library's genealogy section contained extensive records of Salem's founding families, including birth certificates, death certificates, marriage records, and family histories. The library's collection also included personal papers and documents that had been donated by local families over the years. These materials provided intimate glimpses into the daily lives and concerns of Salem's residents during the late 1800s and early 1900s. The librarian, Mrs. Helen Foster, had been working in the genealogy section for over 30 years and was considered an expert on Salem's family histories. She was intrigued by Emma's research and offered to help locate any materials that might be relevant to the Whitmore and Blackwood families. What Emma discovered about the Whitmore family was both fascinating and disturbing. Catherine Whitmore had married Jonathan Blackwood on October 31, 1899, just as the studio records indicated. But their marriage had been brief and tragic. Jonathan had died less than 6 months after the wedding, in what was described as a sudden and mysterious illness that had baffled the local physicians. The medical records from Jonathan's illness painted a picture of a healthy young man who had suddenly begun experiencing symptoms that defied diagnosis. He had suffered from severe headaches, hallucinations, and a progressive weakness that had ultimately led to his death. Dr. William Patterson, the physician who had treated Jonathan, had written in his notes that the patient had claimed to see and hear things that weren't there. Jonathan had spoken repeatedly of a woman who visited him at night, warning him of impending doom. The doctor's notes described Jonathan's condition as deteriorating rapidly. Despite all attempts at treatment, he had become increasingly agitated and fearful, claiming that he was being pursued by supernatural forces. Catherine had never remarried, and she had lived as a widow in her father's house until her own death in 1934. She had become increasingly reclusive over the years, rarely venturing out in public and refusing to receive visitors. The family records also revealed that Catherine had suffered from what Victorian-era doctors had termed nervous disorders following her husband's death. She had been treated by several physicians for symptoms that included insomnia, anxiety, and claims of seeing and hearing things that others could not perceive. Catherine's condition had been a source of great concern for her family, who had tried various treatments including rest cures, travel, and consultations with specialists from Portland and San Francisco. Emma found a particularly intriguing entry in Judge Whitmore's personal diary, which had been donated to the library by the family estate. In an entry dated March 15, 1900, the judge had written, "Catherine continues to be troubled by visions of a woman she claims to have seen at her wedding. She insists that this woman was present in the studio that day, though no one else recalls seeing her. The physicians believe these visions are a manifestation of her grief, but Catherine maintains that the woman spoke to her and warned her of impending tragedy." Emma felt a chill as she read the diary entry. Catherine Whitmore had claimed to see a mysterious woman at her wedding, and now, more than a century later, that same woman's face was visible in the wedding photograph. The diary contained several other references to Catherine's deteriorating mental state following Jonathan's death. Judge Whitmore had written about his daughter's increasing isolation and her refusal to discuss her experiences with the mysterious woman. In one particularly disturbing entry, dated June 10, 1900, the judge had written, "Catherine has begun speaking to empty rooms, as if carrying on conversations with someone who is not there. She claims that the woman from her wedding continues to visit her, bringing messages about the family's future. I fear that my daughter's grief has driven her to madness." The judge's diary also revealed his own growing concern about supernatural influences in his household. He had noted strange occurrences, such as unexplained sounds, objects moving on their own, and sudden drops in temperature that seemed to coincide with Catherine's episodes. Emma decided to research the Blackwood family to see if she could find any connection to the mysterious woman. Jonathan Blackwood had come to Salem from Boston in 1898, establishing a successful import business that dealt primarily in goods from the Far East. The records showed that Jonathan had been born in Boston in 1872 to a family of merchants and traders. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Blackwood, had been involved in the China trade, importing tea, silk, and other luxury goods for sale in American markets. Jonathan had received an excellent education attending Harvard University before joining his father's business. He had shown considerable aptitude for commerce and had been instrumental in expanding the family's operations to include trade with Japan and other Asian countries. The Blackwood family had been well respected in Boston's merchant community, known for their integrity and business acumen. They had maintained offices in several major ports and had established trading relationships throughout Asia. But Emma discovered something troubling about Jonathan's family history. The Blackwood family had been associated with several unexplained deaths and mysterious occurrences over the years. Jonathan's grandfather had died under suspicious circumstances in 1845, and his uncle had disappeared without a trace in 1867. Most disturbing was the discovery that Jonathan's mother, Margaret Blackwood, had died in 1895, 4 years before the wedding photograph was taken. According to the death certificate, Margaret had died of pneumonia in Boston, and she had been buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery. Emma obtained a copy of Margaret Blackwood's death certificate and compared the physical description to the mysterious face in the wedding photograph. The description matched: a woman in her 30s with dark hair and pale skin. But if Margaret Blackwood had died in 1895, how could her face appear in a photograph taken in 1899? The mystery deepened when Emma discovered additional information about Margaret Blackwood's death. Hospital records indicated that she had died under unusual circumstances with symptoms that didn't match the pneumonia diagnosis listed on her death certificate. Emma decided to contact Dr. Richard Thornton, a professor of photography history at the University of Oregon, to get his opinion on the mysterious photograph. Dr. Thornton was considered one of the leading experts on Victorian-era photography techniques and had written several books on the subject. Dr. Thornton had spent his career studying the technical and artistic aspects of 19th-century photography, with particular expertise in the work of American portrait photographers. He had examined thousands of historical photographs and was skilled at identifying authentic images versus those that had been manipulated or altered. His expertise extended to the technical aspects of spirit photography, a movement that had been popular during the Victorian era. He had studied numerous examples of alleged supernatural photographs and had developed techniques for distinguishing genuine anomalies from deliberate hoaxes. Dr. Thornton examined the high-resolution scans that Emma had made of the Whitmore wedding photograph. His initial assessment was that the image was genuine and had not been manipulated or altered in any way. The glass plate negative shows no signs of tampering or double exposure, Dr. Thornton explained. The mysterious face appears to be an integral part of the original image, captured at the same time as the rest of the photograph. Dr. Thornton was particularly intrigued by the technical aspects of the phenomenon. In 1899, photography was still a relatively new technology, and there were many things about the process that photographers didn't fully understand. Some believed that cameras could capture things that the human eye couldn't see, including spiritual entities or psychic impressions. The professor went on to explain that there had been a movement during the late 1800s called spirit photography, in which photographers claimed to capture images of ghosts and other supernatural entities. Most of these photographs had been proven to be hoaxes, created through double exposure or other photographic tricks. But this image is different, Dr. Thornton said. If it's a hoax, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one. The mysterious face is perfectly integrated into the reflection, with accurate lighting and perspective. It would have required considerable skill and planning to create such an effect. Dr. Thornton also noted that the positioning of the mysterious face in the mirror's reflection was technically correct, following the laws of optics and perspective that would govern how a real person standing in that location would appear in the reflection. The level of technical accuracy suggests that either this is a genuine supernatural phenomenon or it was created by someone with an extremely sophisticated understanding of photographic techniques and optical principles, Dr. Thornton concluded. The professor also pointed out that Marcus Hartley had been known to experiment with unusual photographic techniques, and that he had been interested in the possibility of capturing supernatural phenomena. Dr. Thornton suggested that Emma contact other members of the Whitmore and Blackwood families to see if they had any knowledge of the mysterious woman or any family stories that might explain the phenomenon. Emma's research led her to Margaret Whitmore Chen, Catherine's great-niece who lived in Portland. Margaret was in her 70s and was the family's unofficial historian, maintaining extensive records of the Whitmore family genealogy. Margaret lived in a Victorian house that had been in the Whitmore family for generations, filled with antiques and family heirlooms that told the story of Salem's social history. She had spent decades researching her family's past and had compiled extensive genealogical charts and family trees. The house itself was a testament to the Whitmore family's former prosperity, with original Victorian furnishings and decorative objects that had been passed down through generations. Margaret had carefully preserved these items as a way of honoring her family's history. When Emma showed Margaret the wedding photograph and pointed out the mysterious face in the mirror, the elderly woman's reaction was immediate and unsettling. "That's her," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the woman who cursed our family." Margaret explained that the story of the mysterious woman had been passed down through the family for generations, though most family members had dismissed it as superstition or folklore. According to family legend, a woman had appeared at Catherine's wedding uninvited and had approached the bride during the reception. The woman had claimed to be Jonathan's mother and had warned Catherine that her marriage was doomed. The family story says that Catherine tried to have the woman removed from the reception, but when the ushers went to escort her out, she had vanished, Margaret explained. No one could find her, and no one could explain how she had gotten into the reception in the first place. Margaret went on to explain that the family had experienced a series of tragedies and misfortunes following the wedding. Jonathan's sudden death had been only the beginning. Catherine's brother had died in a hunting accident in 1902. Her father, Judge Whitmore, had suffered a stroke in 1905 that left him partially paralyzed. The family's fortune had been lost in a series of bad investments and business failures. "Every generation of our family has experienced unexplained tragedies," Margaret said. "Deaths, disappearances, financial ruin, mental illness. We've always wondered if there was some kind of curse on the family, but we never had any proof. Until now." Margaret showed Emma a collection of family photographs dating from the early 1900s through the present day. In several of the photographs, particularly those taken at family gatherings and celebrations, the same mysterious face could be seen in mirrors, windows, or other reflective surfaces. The woman never aged in the photographs. She appeared exactly the same in a 1925 family portrait as she did in the 1899 wedding photograph. Her presence seemed to coincide with periods of family tragedy and misfortune. Emma examined the photographs carefully, noting the consistency of the mysterious woman's appearance across more than a century of family pictures. The face was always the same: dark hair, pale skin, and that haunting expression of sadness or anger. In some photographs, the woman appeared to be reaching toward the camera, as if trying to break through the barrier between the world of the living and whatever realm she inhabited. In others, she seemed to be pointing at specific family members, as if marking them for some unknown fate. The pattern was undeniable and deeply disturbing. The mysterious woman's appearances seemed to predict or coincide with family tragedies, suggesting that her presence was somehow connected to the misfortunes that had plagued the Whitmore family for generations. Emma was skeptical of the curse theory, but she couldn't deny the evidence of the photographs. The same face appeared in family pictures spanning more than a century, always in reflections, always watching. Margaret also showed Emma a collection of family documents that detailed the various tragedies that had befallen the Whitmore family over the years. The pattern was undeniable. Each generation had experienced unexplained deaths, financial ruin, or other misfortunes that seemed to defy rational explanation. "My grandfather died in a car accident in 1923, Margaret explained. "My father lost his business during the Depression, even though he was a careful and conservative businessman. My brother disappeared while hiking in the Cascade Mountains in 1978, and his body was never found." Margaret's own life had been marked by tragedy as well. Her first husband had died in Vietnam, her second husband had been killed in an industrial accident, and her only child had died of leukemia at the age of 12. "I've always felt like there was something watching our family, waiting for the right moment to strike," Margaret said. "Now I know what it was." The weight of generations of tragedy was evident in Margaret's voice and demeanor. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of the family curse, never knowing when the next tragedy would strike. Emma decided to research the history of the Hartley photography studio to see if there were any other unusual photographs or unexplained phenomena associated with the location. The studio records revealed that Marcus Hartley, the founder, had been interested in the supernatural and had experimented with spirit photography during the 1890s. He had claimed to have captured images of ghosts and other supernatural entities, though most of his contemporaries had dismissed his work as fraudulent. Emma found a journal that Marcus Hartley had kept during the 1890s in which he described his experiments with what he called psychic photography. In one entry, dated October 30th, 1899, the day before the Whitmore wedding, Hartley had written, "I have been experimenting with new techniques to capture spiritual emanations in my photographs. Tomorrow's wedding may provide an opportunity to test my theories." The journal entry suggested that Hartley had deliberately attempted to capture supernatural phenomena in the Whitmore wedding photograph. But if that was the case, what had he actually captured? Hartley's journal contained detailed descriptions of his photographic experiments, including attempts to capture what he believed were psychic impressions left by strong emotions or traumatic events. He had theorized that certain locations might retain spiritual energy that could be detected by photographic equipment. "I believe that the camera, being a mechanical device without the limitations of human perception, may be capable of recording phenomena that our eyes cannot see," Hartley had written. "If spirits or psychic impressions exist, they should leave traces that can be captured on photographic plates." Hartley had also experimented with different types of photographic plates and chemical processes, believing that certain combinations might be more sensitive to supernatural phenomena than others. Emma decided to investigate the history of the building that housed the Hartley studio. The structure had been built in 1885 as a commercial building, but the land on which it stood had a much longer and more troubling history. Research at the Marion County Historical Society revealed that the site had been the location of a private residence during the 1850s and 1860s. The house had belonged to a family named Morrison, who had been among Salem's earliest settlers. The Morrison family had arrived in Oregon Territory in 1845, part of the Great Migration of pioneers who had traveled the Oregon Trail in search of new opportunities in the West. They had established a successful farm and had become prominent members of Salem's growing community. The family had been well respected in the community, known for their hard work and generosity. They had contributed to the construction of Salem's first church and had been instrumental in establishing the town's first school. But the Morrison family had experienced a series of tragedies during their time in the house. The eldest daughter, Elizabeth Morrison, had died under mysterious circumstances in 1863. According to newspaper accounts, Elizabeth had been found dead in her bedroom with no apparent cause of death. The local physician had been unable to determine what had killed her. Emma found a description of Elizabeth Morrison in a newspaper obituary from 1863. The description matched the mysterious woman in the wedding photograph, a woman in her 30s with dark hair and pale skin. But the timeline didn't make sense. If Elizabeth Morrison had died in 1863, how could she appear in a photograph taken in 1899, and why would she be identified as Jonathan Blackwood's mother? Emma decided to dig deeper into the connection between the Morrison and Blackwood families. Her research led her to ship passenger records from the 1840s, which showed that Thomas Blackwood, Jonathan's father, had traveled from Boston to Oregon Territory in 1847. The records indicated that Thomas Blackwood had stayed in Salem for several months in 1847 before returning to Boston. During his time in Salem, he had boarded at the Morrison house. Emma found a diary entry written by Elizabeth Morrison in 1847, in which she described her relationship with Thomas Blackwood. The entry revealed that Elizabeth and Thomas had fallen in love during his stay in Salem, and that Elizabeth had expected him to propose marriage. "Mr. Blackwood has been the most attentive and charming gentleman," Elizabeth had written. "He speaks often of his plans for the future, and has hinted that those plans might include a wife. I dare to hope that he sees in me a suitable companion for the life he envisions." But Thomas had returned to Boston without proposing, leaving Elizabeth heartbroken and humiliated. The diary entries from the following years showed that Elizabeth had never recovered from the betrayal, becoming increasingly bitter and reclusive. "He promised to return for me," Elizabeth had written in 1848. "He said that he needed time to establish himself in business, but that he would come back to Salem and make me his wife. It has been a year now, and I have received no word from him. By 1850, Elizabeth's diary entries had become increasingly desperate and angry. "I have learned that Mr. Blackwood has married another woman in Boston. All his promises were lies. He used my affections for his own amusement and then discarded me like a worn-out garment." The diary entries from the final years of Elizabeth's life painted a picture of a woman consumed by bitterness and despair. She had withdrawn from society and had become obsessed with the idea of revenge against Thomas Blackwood. Emma realized that she had uncovered a connection between the Morrison and Blackwood families that spanned more than 50 years. Elizabeth Morrison had been in love with Jonathan's father, and her death in 1863 had occurred under mysterious circumstances that suggested she might have taken her own life. But the mystery deepened when Emma discovered that Elizabeth Morrison had never married and had no children. So how could she have appeared at Jonathan's wedding claiming to be his mother? Emma decided to examine the Blackwood family records more carefully. She discovered that Jonathan's birth certificate listed his mother as Margaret Morrison Blackwood, not Margaret Blackwood, as she had previously thought. The middle name Morrison suggested a connection to the Salem Morrison family. Further research revealed that Margaret Morrison Blackwood was Elizabeth Morrison's younger sister, who had moved to Boston in 1850 and had married Thomas Blackwood in 1851. The family connection explained how Elizabeth Morrison might have known about Jonathan's wedding and why she might have felt entitled to attend, but it didn't explain how she could appear in the photograph if she had died in 1863. Emma decided to visit the Salem Pioneer Cemetery to see if she could find Elizabeth Morrison's grave. The cemetery records showed that Elizabeth had been buried in the Morrison family plot in 1863. Emma found the grave marker, which confirmed the date of Elizabeth's death as March 15, 1863. But there was something unusual about the inscription. Below Elizabeth's name and dates, there was a line that read, "She waits for justice." The inscription suggested that Elizabeth's family had believed her death was not natural, and that they had expected some kind of justice or resolution that had never come. Emma decided to research the circumstances of Elizabeth Morrison's death more thoroughly. She found the coroner's report from 1863, which described the condition of Elizabeth's body when it was discovered. The report indicated that Elizabeth had been found in her bedroom, dressed in her finest clothes, as if she were attending a special event. There were no signs of violence or struggle, and no indication of poison or other obvious causes of death. But the report also noted that Elizabeth's bedroom mirror had been shattered, with glass fragments scattered across the floor. The coroner had been unable to explain how the mirror had been broken or why Elizabeth would have been in her room during the time when the damage occurred. The broken mirror detail struck Emma as significant, given that the mysterious face had appeared in the mirror of the wedding photograph. Perhaps there was some connection between Elizabeth's death and mirrors or reflective surfaces. Emma began to suspect that Elizabeth Morrison's death was connected to the supernatural phenomena that had plagued the Whitmore family. Perhaps Elizabeth's spirit had been trapped in some way, bound to the location where she had died and unable to find peace. Emma decided to investigate whether there had been any other unexplained phenomena associated with the Morrison house or the land where it had stood. She found newspaper accounts from the 1860s and 1870s that described strange occurrences in the area. Neighbors had reported seeing lights in the Morrison house long after the family had moved away. There had been accounts of mysterious sounds, unexplained cold spots, and sightings of a woman in Victorian dress walking through the area at night. The phenomena had continued even after the Morrison house was demolished in 1884 to make way for the commercial building that would house the Hartley studio. Workers who had demolished the house had reported strange experiences, including tools that moved on their own, and the sound of a woman crying when no one was present. Emma realized that the Hartley studio had been built on the exact location where Elizabeth Morrison had died. This might explain why Marcus Hartley had been interested in spirit photography and why he had been able to capture supernatural phenomena in his photographs. Emma decided to examine other photographs taken at the Hartley studio during the 1890s and early 1900s to see if Elizabeth Morrison's image appeared in any other pictures. She found several photographs that showed the same mysterious face in mirrors or other reflective surfaces. The woman appeared in family portraits, wedding photographs, and even some commercial photographs taken for local businesses. But Emma noticed a pattern in the appearances. Elizabeth Morrison's image seemed to appear most frequently in photographs taken during times of celebration or happiness, particularly weddings and family gatherings. Emma began to theorize that Elizabeth's spirit was drawn to moments of joy and love, perhaps because she had been denied these experiences in her own life. Her appearance in the photographs might be an attempt to participate in the happiness that she had never been able to experience. But there was also a darker pattern to consider. The families whose photographs contained Elizabeth's image had all experienced subsequent tragedies and misfortunes. This suggested that her presence might not be benevolent, but rather a harbinger of doom. Emma decided to contact a paranormal investigator to get a professional opinion on the phenomena she had discovered. She reached out to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a parapsychologist who specialized in photographic evidence of supernatural activity. Dr. Mitchell had spent 20 years studying cases of apparent supernatural phenomena with particular expertise in analyzing photographic evidence. She had investigated hundreds of claims of ghostly apparitions and had developed techniques for distinguishing genuine paranormal activity from hoaxes or natural phenomena. Dr. Mitchell's work had been published in several peer-reviewed journals, and she had consulted on paranormal investigations for law enforcement agencies and historical societies throughout the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Mitchell examined the photographs and listened to Emma's research findings. Her assessment was that the images represented genuine paranormal activity, possibly involving a spirit that was bound to a specific location. The consistency of the image across multiple photographs and decades suggests that we're dealing with an intelligent entity, Dr. Mitchell explained. The fact that the spirit appears in reflective surfaces is particularly significant, as mirrors have long been associated with supernatural phenomena in folklore and paranormal research. Dr. Mitchell went on to explain that mirrors were often considered to be portals between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. In many cultures, mirrors were covered or removed from homes where someone had died, to prevent the spirit from becoming trapped or from using the mirror as a means of communication. The broken mirror in Elizabeth Morrison's bedroom at the time of her death is particularly significant, Dr. Mitchell said. It's possible that her spirit became bound to mirrors or reflective surfaces as a result of the circumstances surrounding her death. Dr. Mitchell suggested that Elizabeth Morrison's spirit might be trapped in a state of unrest due to the circumstances of her death and her unresolved feelings about Thomas Blackwood's betrayal. Spirits who die with strong emotional attachments or unfinished business often remain earthbound, Dr. Mitchell said. Elizabeth's love for Thomas Blackwood and her anger at his abandonment might have created a psychic bond that persisted after her death. Dr. Mitchell recommended that Emma try to make contact with Elizabeth's spirit to determine what she wanted and whether there was any way to help her find peace. Emma was hesitant to attempt direct communication with a potentially dangerous spirit, but she was also curious about what Elizabeth might have to say. She decided to return to the old Hartley studio building to see if she could sense Elizabeth's presence. The building was scheduled for demolition in just a few weeks, so this might be Emma's last opportunity to investigate the phenomena at their source. Emma returned to the studio on a cold November evening, bringing with her a digital camera and recording equipment. She wanted to document any supernatural activity that might occur during her visit. The studio felt different at night. The shadows seemed deeper, and there was a sense of presence that Emma hadn't noticed during her daytime visits. She set up her equipment in the main studio space, where the Whitmore wedding photograph had been taken. Emma began by speaking aloud to Elizabeth's spirit, explaining who she was and why she was there. She asked Elizabeth to make her presence known if she was listening. At first, nothing happened, but after several minutes, Emma noticed that the temperature in the room had dropped significantly. Her breath became visible in the cold air, and she could see frost forming on the windows. Emma's digital camera began malfunctioning, displaying error messages and shutting down repeatedly. The recording equipment picked up strange sounds, whispers, footsteps, and what sounded like a woman crying. Then Emma saw her. Elizabeth Morrison appeared in the reflection of an old mirror that stood in the corner of the studio. She looked exactly as she had in the wedding photograph, a woman in her 30s with dark hair and pale skin, wearing a dark Victorian dress. Elizabeth's reflection moved independently of Emma's, turning to face her directly. The spirit's lips moved as if she was speaking, but Emma couldn't hear any words. Emma tried to communicate with Elizabeth, asking her what she wanted and why she had been appearing in the photographs. The spirit's reflection became more agitated, and the mirror began to vibrate on its stand. Suddenly, Emma heard a voice, faint but clear. "He promised to return. He promised to marry me. But he chose another, and then another, and another. They must all pay for his betrayal." Emma realized that Elizabeth's appearances in the family photographs weren't random. She was targeting the descendants of Thomas Blackwood, seeking revenge for the love that had been denied to her. "Jonathan wasn't responsible for his father's actions," Emma said aloud. "He didn't deserve to die for something his father did." Elizabeth's reflection became more violent, and the mirror cracked down the middle. "They carry his blood. They carry his lies. They must all pay." Emma understood now that Elizabeth's spirit was consumed by a desire for revenge that had grown stronger over the decades. Her appearances in the family photographs were a way of marking her targets, cursing them to experience the same heartbreak and loss that she had endured. Emma tried to reason with Elizabeth, explaining that revenge wouldn't bring her peace and that the innocent descendants of Thomas Blackwood didn't deserve to suffer for his mistakes. But Elizabeth's spirit seemed beyond reason. The temperature in the room continued to drop, and Emma could see her breath forming ice crystals in the air. The recording equipment was picking up increasingly violent sounds, breaking glass, screaming, and what sounded like furniture being thrown around. Emma realized that she was in danger. Elizabeth's spirit had become malevolent over the years, and her presence was becoming more powerful and threatening. Emma gathered her equipment and prepared to leave the studio, but the door slammed shut before she could reach it. She was trapped in the room with an increasingly violent spirit. Emma tried a different approach. Instead of trying to reason with Elizabeth, she began to speak about Thomas Blackwood and the pain he had caused. "I know Thomas hurt you," Emma said. "I know he made promises he didn't keep, but holding on to that anger is only hurting you. It's keeping you trapped here, unable to find peace." Elizabeth's reflection in the broken mirror seemed to pause, listening to Emma's words. "Thomas is dead," Emma continued. "He died almost a century ago. Your anger can't hurt him anymore, but it's destroying you and innocent people who never wronged you." The temperature in the room began to stabilize, and the violent sounds from the recording equipment quieted. Emma saw tears in Elizabeth's reflected eyes. For the first time, the spirit looked sad rather than angry. "I loved him so much," Elizabeth's voice whispered. "I waited for him to come back. I waited until I couldn't wait anymore." Emma realized that Elizabeth had taken her own life out of despair over Thomas's abandonment. Her death had been a suicide, not a natural death as the family had claimed. "I know you loved him," Emma said gently, "but love shouldn't cause this much pain. You deserve to find peace, Elizabeth. You deserve to let go of the anger and move on." Elizabeth's reflection began to fade, becoming more transparent with each passing moment. "How can I let go?" Elizabeth asked. "How can I forget the promises he made?" Emma thought carefully about her response. "You don't have to forget, but you can forgive. Not for his sake, but for yours. Forgiveness will set you free." Elizabeth's reflection disappeared entirely, and the room returned to normal temperature. The recording equipment stopped picking up supernatural sounds, and Emma's camera began working properly again. Emma waited in the studio for several more hours, but Elizabeth's spirit didn't reappear. She seemed to have finally found the peace that had eluded her for more than a century and a half. Emma left the studio that night with a sense of closure. She had solved the mystery of the wedding photograph and had helped a tormented spirit find peace. But Emma's work wasn't finished. She still needed to inform the Whitmore family about what she had discovered and help them understand that the curse that had plagued their family for generations had finally been broken. Emma contacted Margaret Whitmore Chen and arranged to meet with her to discuss the resolution of the family mystery. Margaret was initially skeptical of Emma's account, but she became more convinced when Emma showed her the recordings and photographs from her encounter with Elizabeth's spirit. "You're saying that this woman's ghost has been haunting our family for over a century because of something that happened before any of us were even born?" Margaret asked. Emma explained the connection between Thomas Blackwood and Elizabeth Morrison, and how Elizabeth's unrequited love had turned into a desire for revenge that had persisted after her death. "But why did she target our family instead of the Blackwoods?" Margaret wanted to know. Emma had wondered about this herself, and her research had revealed the answer. After Jonathan Blackwood's death in 1900, Catherine Whitmore had inherited his business and his estate. The Blackwood name had died out with Jonathan, but the Whitmore family had continued to benefit from the wealth that Thomas Blackwood had accumulated. In Elizabeth's mind, the Whitmores had become the inheritors of Thomas's betrayal, and therefore deserving of punishment. Margaret was relieved to learn that the family curse had been broken, but she was also saddened by the tragic story of Elizabeth Morrison. "It's terrible to think that one woman's heartbreak could cause so much suffering for so many people," Margaret said. "I almost feel sorry for her." Emma agreed that Elizabeth's story was tragic, but she was hopeful that the spirit had finally found peace and that the Whitmore family could move forward without the shadow of supernatural persecution. Emma completed her work at the Hartley studio just days before the building was demolished. She had successfully digitized the entire photographic collection, preserving a valuable record of Salem's history. The Whitmore wedding photograph became one of the most significant pieces in the collection, not just for its historical value, but for the supernatural mystery it had contained. Emma wrote a detailed report about her investigation, which was included in the archives, along with the digitized photographs. The Salem Historical Society decided to create a special exhibit about the paranormal history of Salem, featuring the Whitmore wedding photograph and Emma's research into the Elizabeth Morrison case. The exhibit attracted visitors from around the world who were interested in supernatural phenomena and historical mysteries. Emma's work on the case earned her recognition in the field of paranormal research, and she was invited to speak at conferences and universities about the intersection of historical preservation and supernatural investigation. But for Emma, the most important outcome of the case was the knowledge that she had helped a tormented spirit find peace and had freed a family from a century-old curse. The Whitmore wedding photograph still shows the mysterious face in the mirror, but now viewers know the story behind that face. Elizabeth Morrison's image serves as a reminder of the power of love and loss and the importance of forgiveness in finding peace. Emma often thinks about Elizabeth Morrison and wonders what her life might have been like if Thomas Blackwood had kept his promises. But she also believes that Elizabeth's spirit has finally found the happiness that eluded her in life. The old Hartley studio building was demolished in December 2023, but the photographs and stories it contained live on in the digital archives that Emma created. The building may be gone, but the history it preserved will continue to educate and fascinate future generations. Emma's investigation of the Whitmore wedding photograph proved that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity, persistence, and compassion to uncover the truth. The face in the mirror may have been a mystery for over a century, but it was never truly unknown. Elizabeth Morrison had been waiting all along for someone to tell her story and help her find the peace that had been denied to her in life. In the end, the 1899 wedding photograph became more than just a historical artifact. It became a testament to the enduring power of love, the destructive nature of revenge, and the healing potential of forgiveness. Emma's work reminded everyone who heard the story that the past is never truly past, and that sometimes the dead need the help of the living to find their way to peace. The mystery of the face in the mirror had been solved, but the lessons it taught about love, loss, and redemption would continue to resonate for generations to come. Years later, Emma would continue to work with historical photographs, but she would never forget the case of Elizabeth Morrison and the Whitmore wedding photograph. It had taught her that history was more than just dates and facts. It was about real people with real emotions, whose stories deserved to be told and whose spirits deserved to find peace. The face in the mirror would always be there, captured forever in that moment from 1899, but now it served as a reminder of the power of compassion and understanding to heal even the deepest wounds of the human heart.